The winter is here edition of the Pick Six podcast. Hello, everybody. I'm Sam McKewon along with Evan Bland, Dirk Chatelain. You never know what Tom Shatel could drop into. You never quite know when he's going to come in. But hello, everybody. This is January 14th, 2021. We're in the midst of, I guess, the off season for Nebraska football, which has turned into the NBA off season. And the NBA off season is now in the NBA season. So, see, there's Tom. He's coming in right now. See, I told you. Anyway, hello to everyone. Hope your new year is going okay. Lots going on, obviously, in the world, but lots going on just in our backyard as it relates to Husker sports. And, of course, we're going to talk quite a bit about Husker football today. Have to, with all of the roster changes that have gone this week. Some actually really good. And one or two that I guess I would consider a little concerning, but one was expected, one kind of wasn't, but kind of was. And we'll go through all of the movement with Mills and Robinson leaving and a couple guys coming back and then Nebraska probably doing better so far in the transfer portal than arguably any team in the Big Ten, which is a little surprising, but they've done well there so far. So we'll go over that. Dirk's got a piece running Friday. We're recording this on a Thursday. He's going to talk a little bit about that. About it's been 20 years, 19 years since Nebraska football has really been, a top 10 football program. It's been a long time. I think they've been inside the top 10. I'm sure you'll talk about this a few times, but they never ended up there at the end of the season. So it's been a long time. It doesn't feel as long as it probably has been because I've been covering it all along. So, but it's been a while. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. And then whatever else rolls across our minds, maybe a little national title talk. We can talk a little hoops. They're on a pause. I can chat a little bit about that, a little bit about recruiting, whatever we need to talk about there. But let me let everybody know we're still sponsored by the Schwalbach Agency. Team Schwalbach is a family-owned all-state insurance agency with 4 licensed insurance pros, saving thousands of Nebraska Husker fans money. They sell homeowner, auto, life, and flood insurance across Nebraska, and they also insure all the big boy toys, motorcycles, boats, RVs, and off-road vehicles. If you've had your roof replaced in the last 5 years, give Daryl Schwalbach, Kyle Schwalbach, Nancy Mostek, or Kyle Murdoch a call at 402-590-5200. They can help you save a bundle. They have free no-obligation insurance reviews and quotes. They're going to make sure all their Nebraska fans are properly protected. You can reach them at 402-590-5200, 402-590-5200, or www.nebraskaallstate.com. That's www.nebraskaallstate.com. Thank you to Team Schwalbach, the Schwalbach Agency. Okay, we're recording this on a Thursday, and so there will probably be more roster moves after we're done recording this. There might be even a couple while we record it. I've kind of thought about where we're going to start this, and I think we're going to start it on the defensive side of the ball because I think we have a pretty good idea of where that's going to end up, and then we will move to the departure of Wan'Dale Robinson and Dedrick Mills and the addition of Marquise Stepp and Samari Toure, and then we'll go from there. So we'll start with the defense. Nebraska football, Evan, got back Deontay Williams and Markel Dismuke. That is added to Cam Taylor-Britt and JoJo Domann. Those guys are back, and my expectation is that they will be joined by Ben Stille and Will Honas. I feel pretty good about that. When I wrote the thing about Domann last Monday, I felt pretty good about them all coming back, and I still think that's possible. So where does Nebraska stand right now on its defensive side of the ball? And let's say they get all 5 of those guys. How big of an addition is it, and how much better can that defense be as a result of it?
Yeah, they're in a great spot. I mean, really, they would just end up losing 2 starters from last year. DiCaprio Boodle turning his attention to the pros and Colin Miller retiring after that injury. But, I mean, I think we all saw that the defense by the end was the strength of Nebraska. It had gotten a lot better on third down, a lot better stopping the run. No, it wasn't playing a lot of juggernaut offenses toward the end there, but you could absolutely see that thing trending in a positive direction. And I mean, the more I've thought about it, the more, yes, it's really important for next season and next season's defense suddenly goes from a question mark to a known quantity, I think. But just beyond that, I mean, you're looking ahead to 2022, 2023 in terms of trying to, build up guys, let guys develop behind the scenes, like a Miles Farmer or a Quentin Newsome or Noah Pola Gates. I mean, those guys aren't going to have to be thrust into a starting role where it's boom or bust for them next year. I think about a conversation with Mo Berry a couple of years ago when he said, at Nebraska, he had seen a lot of guys thrust into starting jobs before they were ready, and that mentally they never recovered from that if they struggled early on, or there was a kind of a shell shock factor to it. So I think in a roundabout way, this thing really sets up the defense for next year. But beyond that, if the guys behind the starters are willing to stick around and develop and play on special teams and that sort of thing. But yeah, I mean, it's pretty clear that these guys all are excited about coming back. Cam Taylor-Britt, as a junior, deciding to come back as well. And you talk about recruiting and kind of the behind the scenes stuff. The staff had to recruit these guys to come back too, just as much as some of these other guys coming in. So that was a great job for them. And I think it sets up an interesting dynamic now in 2021, where you have a program that wants to be based around its offense, but its defense is clearly the strength of the team at this point. And so how Nebraska adjusts that, whether that means more clock management, whether that means deferring the kick to start the game, it'll be really interesting to see if and how Scott Frost and those guys kind of adjust to this new reality as to the strength of their team.
Quick stat before I throw it to Tom. In 2017, Nebraska's defense was 101st nationally in yards per game allowed, 112th nationally in yards per play, and 116th in points per game. In 2018, they were 94th, 75th, and 88th. In 2019, they were 64th, 62nd, and 66th. This most recent year, in 8 games, they were 50th, 44th, and 64th. They've made an improvement every single year that Shenander has been here, year over year improvement. Tom, do you feel like the numbers I just rattled off, 50, 44th, and 64th, is decent? It's not great. It's decent. It's not an embarrassment. They were embarrassment under Bob Diaco. They're no longer that. They've gotten half the way home. Do you think that this group of players can get the other half of the way home and become, I don't know, Iowa or Wisconsin on defense?
Well, first of all, I would like to say I wanted to add to what Evan said about kicking off. Please don't kick off ever. Just receive every time, okay? And then find somebody who can run it back. Please don't kick off, please.
You're a take the ball and score guy. I remember you writing this after the 2008 Oklahoma game when Bo deferred and kicked it to Oklahoma. I'll never forget this. And I wasn't working for the World-Herald, and you're like, what in the world are they doing? You're right.
It's not just Frost. It's not Riley. It's everybody. This is to me, the headline is that these guys are back, and it's a good thing. It's not going to be a great defense. It won't be a great defense. It has a chance to be a good defense. Mm-hmm. It has a chance to be stable. It has a chance to be a rock. And Scott Frost needs something stable in his program. I feel like, in fact, this entire week, all the news that happened is sort of like a microcosm of Scott Frost's time at Nebraska. His 3 years, where he's trying to fix this, and then something else comes up. He's plugging this hole, another couple holes open up, there's more leaks. And he just can't get ahead. He's always working from behind, and he's worked from behind ever since the opener got washed out. But that they in this past year, I guess I go by the points allowed, Sam. Nebraska allowed 29 points a game this past year. They were better. The offense only scored 23. So these guys you can't expect them to carry the team next year because the offense arguably could be a little worse. I mean, maybe it's good. They shouldn't be better. I mean, I don't think without Wan'Dale, it'll be interesting. But I think that this defense has to hold opponents to like 3 touchdowns or less. And they didn't play Oklahoma. They didn't play Wisconsin this year. And they're going to get that next year. So, and Buffalo, which they could score a few points as well. So
yeah, they can.
But the key here is that Scott Frost will have an area of the team he doesn't necessarily have to worry about. These guys are going to be older. They should be able to hold their own. It's a stable spot in the program where he can go focus on other things like the offense and finding a kicker who can kick the ball in the end zone.
Sam, anybody who's played city rec basketball knows that playing against old men is the worst thing in the world. And they're sweaty. They make every jump shot, and they're way stronger than they look. And I think Nebraska, for a long time, I have lamented the fact that
hairy arms too, right?
Oh my gosh. For a long time, I've lamented the fact that Nebraska football, was during my childhood was obviously a much better program. But part of the reason they were a much better program is they were playing guys who, were 22 and 23 years old, and they're finally going to have a defense that plays 22 and 23-year-olds across the board. I mean, this is going to be an old man defense next year. And I think it's going to be a deep defense. I'm sure they're going to have some scholarship juggling to do, and I'm sure they're going to, frustrate the young guys who anticipated being starters next year. So, there's going to be a little bit of clash of egos and some maybe too many guys in some spots. But I think overall this is a very good thing for Nebraska's defense. And what an interesting contrast with all these guys sticking around on defense. And meanwhile, on the offensive half of the locker room, guys are looking for every escape hatch in the building. And, I think it sets up a really interesting contrast for next year where not just in terms of performance, but, one side of the ball versus the other, but just experience and frankly, age. Mm-hmm. You're going to have a bunch of fifth-year guys on one side of the ball, and on the other side of the ball, you're going to have, a lot of first, second, and third-year guys, probably, except for the quarterback spot. So I think it makes next year very, very interesting in lots of different ways.
So if all 5 come back, and again, I kind of think that'll happen, you will have 5 guys who are all at least 23 years old by the start of the season. 2 of them will be 24, and 1 of them will turn 25 during the season. That's Deontay Williams. So if all 5 come back, that's kind of what those aren't kids. We often will say those for 18 to 22-year-old kids. None of them are kids. They're all men. When I was 24, I wasn't a kid. Certainly, I was doing things I probably shouldn't have been doing, but I certainly wasn't a kid. You make the point about that there might be some young guys who are frustrated. I suspect maybe it's safety, although I think that Dismuke and Williams' return is maybe the most important of the 2, because I don't really know what is behind that now that Miles Farmer has to rehab from probably what is a nasty ankle injury. So after Miles Farmer, you're dealing with Noah Pulla-Gates, who really hasn't played very much football for Nebraska outside of special teams. At corner, Cam Taylor-Britt came back, but that's fine. Boodle is the one guy that left. Quentin Newsom's going to take Boodle's spot, or Braxton Clark will. They're good there. At inside linebacker, if Will Honus comes back, I think you have a 4-man rotation, and that's ideal. And then Doman, there is no other JoJo Doman on the team, and so any guy that thinks he can be JoJo Doman would be wrong. Javen Wright might be that player one day, but Javen was hurt, so he didn't play. So it's in a weird way, I think you're kind of falling into a good situation. I do think Stilley's going to take some snaps away from some young guys, but I feel like there's also so much respect for Stilley that maybe they'll be able to manage it.
Sam, this is how it's supposed to be.
It is.
Yes. Ideally, if you build a program, this is what it's supposed to be like, where young guys have a hard time getting on the field. And I realize that's somewhat impractical to say in 2020 college football where guys step out of the recruiting thing and they immediately want to play. But when you're building a strong program, this is what it's supposed to look like. Now, it's odd that it took these circumstances, for Nebraska to build this kind of depth. But I think, the coaches can probably tell some of those young guys, hey, if you go to Ohio State or Alabama, you're going to have to work pretty hard to get on the field there too. So the one glaring spot that, you don't have to be a genius to identify is they still need to find a pass rusher. And if they could find a pass rusher, I think this could be a top 15, top 20 defense next year. I mean, I realize that they're playing a really great set of offenses, most notably Oklahoma, but I think if they could find that missing piece that they've basically been looking for 15 or 20 years, Nebraska could have a really, really good defense. And unfortunately, I'm not sure that guy's on the roster.
You never want to count anybody out, but I would agree. I don't think that. Could Feldarius Payne take a jump? He could. I mean, I think Payne has the ability to do it, but the way that they ran their schemes last year, they were more modest in their aggression, and I actually liked that. I think one of the things that hurt them in year one is a lot of man coverage, a lot of 6 and 7 man pressures, man coverage. Safeties were getting beat. Aaron Williams, Antonio Reed were getting beat by slot guys. Corners locked people down, but the slot guys lost a lot. And, the slot guys beat Nebraska's safeties, and they've backed off that a little bit and said, all right, you got to go 10 plays to beat it down the field, 10 to 12. And we feel good about ourselves in the red zone. And I think that's one of the adjustments that Shenander made this season. And I think it was a good one. Dirk, you mentioned the contrast between the offense and the defense. One of the big differences is the defense really does have, in some ways, its own head coach a little bit, and Eric Shenander, even though he's not the head coach, obviously he's the defensive coordinator, but he has his own kind of culture and his own style and his own approach and his own personality. And I think it's pretty relational. And then you have the offensive side of the ball, which was Scott Frost's calling card when he was the offensive coordinator at Oregon. And he had this incredible offense at UCF his second year. I mean, it was cool to watch. It was fun. It was dominant. Then he comes to Nebraska, and the first 6 games of year one were kind of struggle bus. The last 6 games were not, and you saw in those last 6 games, they could do something. I mean, this is fun, and you could see good defenses on their heels a little bit, like not sure how to handle all of the speed and the variety of plays. That's gone now, and that's, to be clear, that's the offense that ultimately convinced Wan'Dale Robinson and his camp to give Scott Frost and Nebraska a chance. So I'll offer this just for a minute here, that Robinson's departure was really a 2-year deal. Like, there was trepidation prior to, and I remember talking about this with you guys, with Tom and Tom and Evan, when we went to, Chewy's in Ohio, at Ohio State.
All right.
Before the Ohio State game that day, because I think he had committed to Kentucky right around that time. And I remember saying, the issue here is that there's just people in his camp in 2018, I think that's when it was, that just didn't believe that Nebraska would use him the right way. And at the time, the concern was, well, what about J.D. Spielman? J.D. Spielman's going to take his touches. And, so there was always that trepidation there, but Nebraska went back and convinced him. I think part of what convinced him were the last 4 or 5 games of the year. I think Wan'Dale Robinson watched Nebraska play Ohio State and saw what happened that day. And it was pretty cool to watch. We're all kind of looking at each other like, holy crap. I mean, they might win this game and this is fun. But something since that season, the end of that season, has happened in Nebraska's offense. And even though Robinson got a lot of touches last year, they weren't apparently the kinds of touches that he wanted, that develop him for the NFL. So now he's looking at Kentucky and Purdue and a couple of other teams, and he's left. And there's this frustration because Nebraska poured so much energy and time into Wan'Dale Robinson as the face of the program, and he's gone.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think that speaks to how it surprised Nebraska. Like, again, they're not going to be shooting a Christmas promotional video, a month ago with him dressing up Austin Allen as a Christmas tree if they had any inkling that he was going to go. They're not putting him on the stage with Bill Moose and Scott Frost with the facilities unveiling if they thought that he had any inkling to leave. And so you wonder, I mean, certainly it's a blow because it's more attrition and that's just kind of the reality of college football, but it is a kind of a deeper cut. It's a next level, miss for Nebraska for him to go. And if he ends up at Kentucky, okay, he's closer to home and in his family situation, you can understand that. If he ends up at Purdue and Nebraska has to play him and see him in a role that he preferred to be in a role that he thinks he could be in the NFL, I mean, that hurts. That hurts a lot. And you hope, if you're a Nebraska fan, I mean, the silver lining has to be this needs to be a wake-up call for the coaching staff in terms of how they run their offense, just how they use their guys, listen to their guys. And there's clearly been a disconnect there. You hope, if nothing else, this attrition could, kind of straighten that out a little bit.
A lot of false advertising when it comes to Scott Frost's offense the last 2 years. And apparently that wasn't just false advertising, to the fan base. It was within the building too. Because you're seeing with actions as much as words, you are seeing, frustration in how the ball was distributed, in how, players were used. I think, I think when you come to Nebraska in the fall of 2018, when you commit, then you are expecting a certain style and a certain level, and players clearly were not getting what they signed up for. And I banged this drum, Sam. You're tired of it, and I'm not saying you're angrily tired of it. I'm just saying it's the receiver position this past fall. I mean, if you're recruiting against Nebraska for the same receiver, how do you not just point to that stat sheet and say, look at how Nebraska used their wide receivers last year? Are you sure you want to go to school there? And I think that's something that Nebraska has to confront as a staff. It's like, this is not going to be a quick fix. It's going to take, sort of a philosophical change in terms of how you use talent, how you develop talent. They've got to do a better job taking advantage of their running backs and wide receivers. And the last 2 years have been a complete debacle on that front.
Tom?
Yeah, I agree. And like I said, he's been playing catch up ever since the first season, but it seems like it's become predictable, and I'd like to see a little more imagination out of that. And besides the swing pass, and God, I hate those plays.
Not a fan of the swing.
They sure work well with Devontae Smith, though, don't they? They work like hell with him. But I've said and I've written that the key to his offense is receivers and quarterbacks. But Sam, I'm starting to think maybe the key to this offense is having a running back. You don't have to worry about the running game. Remember that first year? Devine Ozigbo was a solid guy. He really did well. And the offense was probably as good as it's been under Frost here. Ever since then, you made the point this week. He's got quarterbacks running the ball. He's got receivers running the ball. He needs a running back to run the ball. And then he can maybe let everybody else focus on doing what they're supposed to do. Now, that's probably too simple of a way to put it, because the quarterbacks have not developed. And I really believe that the Luke McCaffrey, if it is a decision, maybe it's not a decision, but I think what they do with him is going to be a very important piece of Scott Frost's time here. And we'll see how that goes. But in any case, I think the key to this offense right now is get a running back, and you don't have to worry about it. But you know, maybe this kid from USC is that guy. We'll see. I'm tired of the hype. I just want to see him do it.
Yeah. Well, one question that I've gotten a lot this week in Twitter DMs or in emails is who's going to replace Wan'Dale Robinson at the Duck R? And one of the things that I've kind of been chewing on and tossing around is maybe that role is a little diminished, and not in a bad way. Maybe you look at the players that you have on your team. You have a 6'8" tight end in Austin Allen, a 6'7" tight end in Travis Vokalek. You look at the guys that you've recruited, and you didn't recruit them here to, you know, stand on the sideline and eat Taco Bell. You recruited them to play, and they've recruited a lot of big wide receivers, including the guy that they just got in the transfer portal in Samori Toure. And you know, Thomas Fidone, who is a legitimately everybody wanted him kind of guy. Now, it helped that he grew up a Husker fan, and that helps. But I mean, these are players that they're bringing into the program, and you know, Thomas Fidone's not going to be taking a jet sweep. I mean, he's a big 6'5", 230-pound receiver tight end. If I'm looking at what Nebraska's building from a personnel standpoint, I can make an argument, and I'm not trying to be a Pollyanna when I say it, that maybe part of what they're going to do is just move a little bit away from the guy that plays receiver and running back and move more to here are running backs, here are tight ends and receivers. Oh, by the way, all of them are pretty big. You know, we might have one guy like a Will Nixon who's 5'11", whatever. Alante Brown's 6 foot, 195. But most of the guys on our roster aren't the size of Miles Jones or J.D. Spielman or Wan'Dale Robinson. They're big. It's a bigger team. And that reminds me of Northwestern, Iowa, Wisconsin to some degree. I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing. So in theory, if you go to an offense that says, hey, we're going to run the football downhill, we're going to play action off of that, we'll run the quarterback, but not as much as we have been, because every time we do, our increase of fumbles goes up, which it does. You might be able to sell me on a different offense that is perhaps better statistically than this offense this year, which to me often felt very muddled of like, well, today we're going to do spread and today we're going to do this. And nope, now we're going to run the pistol and we're going to have these receivers out here who catch 9-yard passes. And they did all these different things. And it feels like maybe that if they could decide on an identity, they could get better even as they lose a guy they didn't want to lose.
Sam, it's a great point. And let me give you another model to think about. Bill Callahan and Sean Watson, they would have looked at this tight end, collection, and they would have been slobbering over it.
That's right.
They would have looked at Xavier Betts and they would have said, where was that guy when we were recruiting Nebraska 15 years ago?
Yeah.
This almost has like kind of a West Coast offense personnel group when you look at, some of these big backs and the big tight ends and, receivers that are not necessarily flyers, but can be big targets. And I just, we've talked about this lots of times, but Nebraska, I think there's enough there. It's not like perfect skill talent, and it's certainly not perfect skill talent for what Scott Frost has done at Oregon and UCF. But if they can get a quarterback who is really reliable, who's, accurate, and I don't just mean accurate in a completion percentage type of way. I mean a guy who can
run after the catch.
Yeah, who can make some of the throws that you're seeing from the high-level quarterbacks around the country. I think Nebraska can make it work. It's just going to have to it's going to have to adapt, and maybe Wan'Dale Robinson's departure, as you noted, is sort of a blessing in disguise because it forces them to look at other ways to do things. I think the wild card there is obviously pace. I mean, you can say, well, we're going to slow it down and be rugged and lean on our big guys. We like our offensive line and our tight end, but what does that look like, in the world of fast-paced, no-huddle offense? I think that's going to be a really interesting question too.
That's a good point. I can make the argument that the bigger departure from a just schematic standpoint is Dedrick Mills, but Evan, I think they replaced Dedrick Mills with a pretty good player.
That was going to be kind of my point, Sam, was we talk about these guys Nebraska's getting in the transfer portal and Tom mentioned kind of sick of the hype. I think what's interesting about these additions is they're in their own way proven college players. I mean, you can look up highlights of Marquise Stepp bulldozing Arizona defenders or Oregon defenders in goal line situations. You can see him, running with 4 Notre Dame guys trying to bring him down. Like, this isn't someone who's like, well, his high school film was pretty good. Will he translate? Like, he's proven that he can, and he was just in a system that wasn't befitting of his skills and his talents. And then Samori Toure from Montana as well. I mean, it was at the FCS level, but you see some of the production there, and you say, okay, these guys, this isn't as much of maybe a leap of faith or kind of a projection sort of situation as it often is with high school players. Right. These are guys who can come in and yes, you're trying to replace a proven guy like Dedrick Mills and a proven producer like Wan'Dale Robinson, and that's not necessarily ideal. But we talk about recruiting trends. This feels like it could be the start of a new one when you look around and you see, man, the transfer portal's exploded. Recruiting in terms of signing day as we know it has become pretty quiet, with most guys committing and then signing in December. There hasn't been a lot of fanfare the last couple of years, but I could absolutely see a situation start to develop annually now where, very early, maybe the first week of January in future years, where we see a ton of movement like this, guys going, guys coming, especially if the first year transfer rule ends up getting passed. And it's the sort of deal, if you couple that with NIL, that Nebraska could really benefit in the future. This could be a way that they are able to supplement their recruiting. But I think as it pertains to Samori Toure and Marquise Stepp, it feels like, Nebraska lost some proven guys, but it feels like to me maybe the drop-off isn't nearly as severe as it could be on the surface.
Cade Johnson decided to declare for the NFL draft, which is, good for him. And I think he's going to play in the NFL. If we substituted Samori Toure for Cade Johnson, I think Husker fans would have reacted like, well, we just got a guy better than Wan'Dale Robinson. Right? Like, I think that would have been people's kind of impression of that. The name recognition on Toure is a little lower than it would have been on Cade because people have been watching him for a while. But I think Toure is about as good of a player, and I think he might be more valuable for what Nebraska's looking for because he's an outside receiver who has played a little bit in the slot and can come in. And, I think he's a better player than Levi Falk, who was maybe Nebraska's number 4 receiver this year, number 3 receiver, honestly. And I think Nebraska's got something close to a number 1 receiver, a guy that would fit in a lot of programs. It's interesting that Nebraska was able to get him away from Miami because Miami was very interested. Oregon was very interested, and he goes to Nebraska. And I think in part because he knew that Nebraska was going to need him. And I think some of his decision-making process was knowing that the guy was going to leave, Robinson. So I don't think it was the deciding factor because he was talking to Nebraska for weeks on end, but he didn't announce on Friday. So I think it's valuable that Nebraska is able to provide him with the understanding that he was going to get a lot of targets, which I think he probably is. As far as Marquise Stepp is concerned, I would encourage people to go watch whatever they can of him. I think he is, a little bit of a faster guy maybe than Dedrick Mills in some ways. I don't know that he's necessarily going to make people miss quite as much. But if you look at what he brings to the table, I think you would probably say with great confidence that he can be a sufficient replacement for Mills, provided he gets immediate eligibility, which, is going to take a waiver. And it's going to take a waiver unless the NCAA comes back and approves the one-time transfer, which they may do here in subsequent months. So, we can talk more about the Nebraska offense, I think, when we have sort of a finality on who's all going to be there and who's all going to be back. I'd like to see if there's any other players who decide to transfer, because I think that's always possible with the portal the way it is. We'll just have to see what happens over the next, 48, 72, 96 hours. But as it stands right now, I think Nebraska has a pretty good sense of who it is on offense or what they need to work on. There's a question at quarterback. There's going to be a competition in the spring if McCaffrey's here. Who wins that? Why would you not put Adrian Martinez out there again? Like, what would be the compelling argument against playing him again? But you know who you are at tight end. You know who you are on the offensive line. You need another running back. They got to get better there. And then the wide receiver room is a repeated and constant frustration that they have to fix. And that's where it stands, I suppose, right now. Okay, so the national championship was played on Monday. Alabama won it. Big surprise there, right? They beat Ohio State. That's not a surprise either. So the top 10 came out, and Iowa State made the top 10, I think, for the first time ever, maybe? Ever?
That's I think that's accurate, Sam.
And Northwestern made it for not the first time ever. They've been in the top 10 before, but they made it. They were there.
First time since, mid-90s.
Yeah, I think they made it after the Rose Bowl year. Anyway, those two teams were in the top 10. Nebraska wasn't. And, Dirk, you've got a piece coming out on Friday just sort of outlining some of the the fact that Nebraska used to be in that all the time, and in the last 20 years it hasn't been.
Let me put you on the spot, guys, because I think Sam knows a little bit more about this story than Evan and Tom. So let me ask the other two guys. How many programs do you think have finished a season, at least one season, in the top 10 since Nebraska last did it in 2001?
No idea. A bunch.
52.
52. Great guess. 48. Iowa State and Northwestern were 47 and 48. And Indiana and BYU almost made it at 49 and 50. If Coastal Carolina would have won, they would have done it too. So 48 schools have finished in the top 10 since Nebraska last did it, which is a pretty striking fact, especially when you grew up in the era of this state that I did. Nebraska was in the top 10 every year from 1970 to 1989 or 88. So it's a pretty amazing drought. And especially when you consider all the programs that have kind of had at least one banner season during that span, Kansas State, everybody's done it. Nebraska hasn't done it and hasn't been particularly close. There's been, a few years where they were in the top 10 in November, and then they kind of collapsed late in the season. So I think one thing that's been hard about the fall of this program over the last 20 years is there just hasn't been, I refer to it as like a scrapbook page. There hasn't even been a season that gives you something to point to and say, hey, that was a lot of fun. And I think that's one of the reasons people talk so much about the 90s and the Osborne era. There just hasn't even been kind of that Iowa State type season where in some cases it comes out of nowhere. In some cases it's fulfilling expectations. But man, I think Nebraska fans would love a surprise 11-3, finish number 8 in the country type season, and it's been elusive now for almost 20 years.
I think that's a great point. I've thought about that a lot from what it must be like from a fan perspective, where you can point to all these other schools and it's like, oh yeah, Iowa's Orange Bowl year or whatever else, and I mean, what does Nebraska go back to? Beating Michigan State in 2016, or Taylor Martinez's breakout at Kansas State. Like there are a couple games, but they ultimately didn't amount to anything in terms of a season. I agree. There's been this lost generation where if you are of a certain age, I mean, if you're under 35, what's your great memory of Nebraska football growing up? Like, it just getting blown out against Miami in the Rose Bowl. Like, there just hasn't been a ton of those kind of moments. I think when you talk about fan apathy or frustration or whatever it is, I think that's one of the biggest things is you can't just reminisce with friends and say, man, wasn't that a great season? Or remember when we went to that bowl game and they did well? Like, there's none of that. And that just kills the enthusiasm. I totally agree.
It would be harder to write off, the lost generation or this lost 20 years if they had finished just one of those seasons. If they had beaten Texas in 2009, if they had beaten Oklahoma in 2010, if they'd won a Big 12 championship in 2006, if they'd won the Big 10 championship in 2012. I mean, just finish one of those seasons, and I think people just have a different feeling about what's happened over the last 20 years.
Yep, I agree. I think one of the biggest challenges within that 20-year framework is, you've had 3 coaches in Solich, in Pelini, and now Frost, who had sort of, universal alignment at the time they entered their coaching job. And then you've had 2 coaches in Callahan and Riley who were hired by athletic directors who were viewed to have gone rogue, not only in letting go of Solich and Pelini, but also in hiring the people they did. In other words, they hired the wrong people because they brought in guys who didn't win right away. They fired 9-win coaches. They brought in guys whose schemes and philosophies were very different from the guys that just got fired. And the new coaches who came in were not going to be given any time to build it. They had to come in and win immediately. And when they didn't do that, there was a sense of, that there was going to be, a problem. Will Honus, by the way, just announced that he's coming back.
Big one.
Yeah. Well, I mean, now I guess all is left is Stilly, which I expect him to. So, but we talked about that. Like my anticipation all along was, I just felt like once Doman came back, I'm like, boy, every domino is probably going to fall in place now, because Doman was the one that I thought might have been able to get an NFL free agent contract and catch on somewhere. And I think once he was convinced, then it felt pretty good for everybody else.
Well, Sam, let me throw a hypothetical at you. If they either don't play the Rutgers game or lose the Rutgers game, how much different do you think? How many of these guys do you think still come back if the season ends with the Minnesota game as opposed to the Rutgers game? How many guys come back on defense?
That's a great question. Probably fewer. But, probably fewer. I think there was probably a good vibe that came from that Rutgers game, especially for the defense and the way that they played. But I think if they went and played a bowl and struggled, I still think they probably would have come back. I at the end of the day, I think a lot of these guys are just right on the line as it relates to the NFL. I think Boodle is a guy that was ready to move on with his life. I think he may play in the NFL. He may not. But, DiCaprio Boodle's either going to be in the NFL in 5 years or he's going to be working for a Fortune 500 company, doing, somewhere high up. I mean, he's a special guy. So I could see why he moved on. But I think some of these other guys really do want to play professional football and probably need one more year in order to polish it up. So, or they want to get into coaching or something like that. So I do think that, yes, the Rutgers game was important in that way.
So, okay, let me ask devil's advocate here. Are you saying the vibe on defense was better than it was on offense?
Yes,
Are
absolutely.
you saying that the people who wanted to play the bowl game were on defense?
Yes.
Weren't on offense?
Yes.
Okay.
I know that. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll have a story about it eventually, but yes.
People on offense are bailing and people on defense are back. Okay.
Yes.
I got it.
Yeah, the obvious question is, can Will Honus play running back? Can JoJo Doman play slot receiver?
Well, they got a running back. They need a quarterback who can throw passes. How about a quarterback who can run the option? How about putting that into the offense? Not making it the offense, but adding a wrinkle. We saw what happened in the last game. I get it. It was a cold night at Rutgers. Rutgers is beaten up, but the quarterback run game with a running back who can get yards too might not be a bad way to go.
They kind of got that guy. I mean, Luke McCaffrey can do that if that's what they really want. And I don't know if Luke wants to do that, but
Martinez
Luke can run the option. I mean, don't you think? I mean, he's as fast and whatever you want to call it as almost anybody they've had running that show.
Well, maybe I'm not even talking about the option necessarily as I am. And you wrote about it, Sam, what they did in Rutgers. Quarterback run game with a running back who's going full steam downhill. I mean, that's hard to stop. And then, throw a little option in there. You saw what it did against Ohio State a couple of years ago. Right in the middle of the game, their heads were spinning. They didn't know what was going on defense.
Right.
It threw for a loop. It caused them to pause.
It's tricky.
I
think Martinez is a guy that can do that. To be clear,
that's what I expect from
fumbles
Scott Frost.
sometimes.
I expect Scott Frost to come up with something that's a little different. That's going to keep people on their heels, and we'll use a little imagination like that. We'll see. But
I mean, they do have. I mean, I think the challenge is that they have guys that can do that, Tom. I mean, Adrian and Luke ran a lot, and they're pretty good runners.
They do it.
No issues.
They have running back,
but they fumble a lot. Like
and
you can go back and look at some of the best Nebraska teams of all time, and they fumbled a lot because that's what happens with that offense. The difference is that your defense has to be really good, and the big plays that you create as a result of that offense overwhelm any of the turnovers you make. And so, it's just that's the challenging piece. Is like if you say, okay, we're going to take our quarterback carries from 17 per game or whatever it was like 15, and take them down to 6. I guarantee you're going to have one loss. You're going to probably have 6 or 7 fewer lost fumbles. You just will.
You guys.
And on top of that, you'll have an offense where the receivers get to catch the football and the running backs get to run the ball. It's just a matter of what you want to do with your offense. When Ryan Day took over Ohio State, one of the first things he did is Justin Fields became a passing quarterback, and the JT Barrett era was over. It was over. It was just the whole, we're going to run JT 19 times because that's what Urban Meyer wants, was over. They moved past that. Dwayne Haskins threw it all the time, and Justin Fields has too.
You got to have a quarterback who
Hostek got better.
But you got to throw completions.
Oh yeah.
You guys, in 1999, Nebraska had maybe the best defense in school history. They also had an offense that fumbled approximately 74 times, and they were running option with Dan Alexander, which is not the greatest idea in the world.
No.
And they fumbled a ton, and it cost them a game at Texas, and it probably cost them the national championship. But the difference is
they fumbled 49 times, by the way.
49
times.
the high wire act of that offense, and it was a high wire act.
Yeah.
Sam's, a Millard North grad. He knows what it's like. It also produces an extraordinary amount of big plays.
Yes.
And it did for Nebraska back in the day too. They might have 14 possessions in a game. They might turn the ball over twice or even 3 times, but they were going to have 7 touchdown drives also. And the issue with Nebraska is they're showing the high risk without the high reward. It's high risk, low reward. And part of that is that they don't have a quarterback who can make plays down the field. When I watch other great offenses in college football, Ohio State, Clemson, Alabama being the best examples, but certainly not the only examples. The thing that just jumps off the map is their quarterbacks can make throws that Nebraska cannot make. And frankly, looks awful even attempting. So I think that, yes, the turnover margin is a killer. We've written about it time and time again. But, it's one thing to be high risk if you're high reward. Nebraska is worst of both worlds right now.
Yeah.
And don't forget the Colorado game, Dirk, 99. We're standing there in the end zone, and so all he's got to do is line up a field goal. He calls an option, I believe to Alexander or somebody, and they fumbled to Colorado. And we're all going, what are you doing? That was
I'll never forget. Yeah.
That was a great escape game there. That whole thing could have gone away if they lost that game. Oh.
Yeah, it's if you look at the teams, and we won't use 2020 because everybody was playing different games. But let's go to 2019. You want to know which team lost the fewest fumbles in 2019? Oregon State. Now, what's offense does Oregon State run? Mike Riley's offense. The guy that is the head coach there used to play for Mike and was recruited by Mike. They lost 2 fumbles in 2019. That's what happens. You know who lost the second fewest fumbles in 2017? Nebraska. Nebraska in 2017. And remember, that includes, and Evan remembers this, we were all at Oregon. Tanner Lee fumbled the ball. They lost the game at Oregon at the end because Tanner Lee lost the football. And he, or maybe he got hit. I don't remember. But the point is that they had 2 lost fumbles that year, just 2. And the year before that, they didn't lose very many the year before that either. And they had Tommy. They only lost 5. It's because the offense changes. When you run a pro style offense, your quarterback stop fumbling. And Nebraska has not had that kind of offense. And if you just it's just exactly what Dirk said. You have to expect if you're going to run the offense Frost runs, the big plays got to happen because you're not doing 12 plays down the field running your quarterback 17 times a game without getting fumbles. It's axiomatic.
And the flip side's true too, because like we talked about with the defense, when they're at UCF and scoring 50 points a game, the defense can afford to take more chances, can afford to be aggressive and blitz because they're counting on being able to outscore you. And if you can steal some possessions, then you can pull away with it. But not the case if your offense is scoring 20, 25 points. So I think that's part of kind of that balance too, where you scale this thing back.
Now, if you were to ask Nebraska fans, like Tom, you've always talked about look like you're coached, play good football. If they played like that and they go 8-4, I don't think I'm hearing any complaints from you or from a lot of Husker fans. Am I?
And this goes to what Dirk was saying earlier and what he's writing. And when Husker fans, wouldn't they crave that big season like Iowa State and all the others? I wonder the next time. And it's only been 3 years, but the next time Nebraska wins 9 games, like Barney Cotton said, 9 wins, baby. The next time they win 9 games and go to a decent bowl, what's the attitude going to be like around here? It was very dismissive, and I'm probably at the front of the parade there.
Yeah,
but very dismissive, like, well, that's not good enough. I think it should be people should be pretty damn happy next time they do that. And I know we're all about standards and national titles and all that stuff, but they've got to get back to a point where they expect to win, and they actually do make the plays to win. They don't fumble, they don't turn it over, they don't everything's. They need to get back to solid.
Yeah,
solid should be the goal, and that's hard for a Nebraska fan to say, but I feel in a lot of ways this program is kind of starting over, and it's been beaten down. We've written that story and we've said it and we've analyzed it, and it's they've got to figure out a new way to, not necessarily a new way to win. They just you got to win 9. I want to see what the reaction is.
Guys, let me I got to jump off the call here, but let me leave you with this thought. If Rutgers has a quarterback in the season finale, if Noah Vedral is playing and Nebraska loses that game, which it very easily could have done based on the turnovers, I think the evidence would point to Nebraska as the worst team in the Big Ten in 2020. And that would be, we'd be having a different conversation today. So I think that anybody who gets too rosy about where things stand going into next year needs to look at what could have happened in the second half at Rutgers. And
that's fair. They're 5 yards away from tying Northwestern too. So you got to take the good and the bad there. Like
right,
Minnesota too. Yeah,
the Illinois game was bad. The Minnesota game was maybe worse in some ways.
I mean,
they're 5 yards from tying Northwestern. They're 40 yards from beating Iowa. Like it's the league is so tight in this way that like it really does come down to that stuff. And so you're right. If the Vedral had played, he didn't play. And so at the end of the day, they win the game, and I think they feel better about things. The games that I think they got to learn to win are the ones like Illinois and Minnesota, where you just can't afford to be bad, and in those settings. So if they win, not 9-win seasons are not always created equally. One, so there are some 9-win seasons that are really good and others. And two, I'll tell you what, one of the biggest weaknesses of Bo Pelini in the time that he was here is that he made it hard to enjoy winning.
Right.
Because I think Bo struggled to enjoy winning. And I think he really struggled to enjoy it. And that trickled down to the fan base, and they struggled to enjoy it. And as a result, everything felt disappointing because the head coach was a lunatic half the time, even when they were up by 30, and it just felt bad. It's like angry dad in the room. Scott Frost will not be that way. Now, Scott's not a perfect coach, and there's things he can work on. But if this team wins games, Scott will enjoy it. He will appreciate it, and there will be a level of appreciation there and a level of celebration among his players where after the game they won't feel like crap because they didn't play well enough. They'll feel good.
And I agree.
That's a big advantage that Frost has over Bo.
I agree, Sam, totally. And I also believe Husker fans will also enjoy it more with their Nebraska guy as a head coach doing this. The celebration, we had the big celebration before even he had a first game. The celebration will come when he starts winning, and I think the good vibe is it's a lot. The key to survival in college football is you got to be sane. You got to like who you are. You have to enjoy the little moments. I felt like Nebraska, and maybe over the last 20 years especially, is Husker fans have been always trying to reach for something else, and maybe not enjoying what they had. I feel like the last great moment or the great time was the Taylor Martinez game at Washington. And then you followed up with the K-State, that whole track meet on Thursday night. and they're leaving the league, and it's all, we're going to run over the Big 12 as we go out the door.
Yeah.
But there was just something exhilarating about the way Martinez played, the big play, that they were running up big scores, offense was rolling, and it was very exciting. It was very fresh, and that was coming off. 09 year was a grind. 08 was, the rebuild, and they hadn't done anything like that in years. And they go into that Texas game, and boy, that but again, the whole time, the head coach is tight. He's not enjoying it, and eventually,
yeah, that's the thing.
So anyway,
the thing we haven't got to enjoy yet is the fact that when Frost actually starts winning, there'll actually be an enjoyment to it, and it won't be
I totally agree.
I remember a booster telling me that Bo told him, this is I think 2013, that this whole season's going to be a revenge. This is after the 2012 season.
Yeah,
2013 is going to be a revenge tour for all the people who were mad at him when they lost to Wisconsin. And that's what Bo told a booster. And I'm like, what is going on with this man? There was just so I think that's an underrated weakness of his era is yes, they won the games, but there's so many post games where everybody looked like they felt like crap because they won. And it just that was the thing. And it won't be that way with Scott. Scott will not be that way. He will he's not going to apologize for winning. And I think he genuinely enjoys victories, and we'll see that. And I think you're right that the media will be more appreciative. I think we've hit everything. I want to note probably going to be some changes on the special teams, folks. Anticipate that. That's obviously not surprising, but I would anticipate change.
Thanks, guys. I'm out.
Special teams. I think we're good to go, and that's going to. Tom's out. Evan.
Tom's out.
Anticipate changes on the special teams.
I am anticipating. Okay. Yes.
All right. Okay. Well, I think that's all we've got this week for Pick Six Podcast. For Evan Bland, I'm Sam McKewon. Maybe by the time you listen to this, Ben Stilley will have come back because Will Honus has. So the stuff about the defense will plan out, and we'll see if there's any other transfer portal stuff and expect changes on the special teams. Thanks, Husker fans. Take care.